So, welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and as you can see, Jerry Marzinsky is back. And for new viewers, Jerry will give a brief overview what he has done in his during his career. So, Jerry, you have the floor.
Okay, I've been on the front line of mental health in the United States for over 45 years at this point. I've worked at the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet back in the 70s for about 7 years. Um, I then went back to graduate school again, came out and was working for a county psychiatric hospital in the emergency room doing psych crisis. I then took a job with the Arizona State Prison System working in the psychology department. I worked with um, mentally ill inmates, criminally insane for close to 18 years. I then went back out in the last 10 years of my employment. I worked doing psych crisis in emergency rooms across Tucson. Um, I now have a booming private practice uh, and you know, talk about some of my experiences working with criminally insane individuals.
Mhm. Okay. So, I recently received a comment. The interview that we did with his name slipped my mind. Durkin.
Oh yeah, I
What is his first name?
think it's Dirk.
Durkin is the last name. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Oh,
Anyway, somebody made a comment saying, "Yeah, Jerry is not a doctor." Yeah, Jerry never said he is a
no,
doctor.
matter of fact, I tried to debunk that, and they keep calling me doctor. So finally, I just got tired of it. It's like for years I tried to put that down. That started with Robert Stanley in the first interview. When I was working at the prison, I said, "I'll do the interview with you, but I need you to come up with an alias for me." And he came up with Dr. J. And I wrote him back right after that. I said, I'm not a doctor. Don't call me Dr. J. He left it on there anyway, and then it just went out of control. And I just got tired of correcting. I corrected it probably 100 times, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, no, Jerry is not a doctor. He never said he is a doctor, but he worked as a counselor in the prison system and in mental health facilities. So, I'm pretty sure he picked up a few things more
Yeah.
than, you know, those.
Formerly, I got a BA in psychology. I got a master's degree in counseling and 2 years in a PhD program before I got sick of their bullcrap. Their programming.
Yeah, yeah, I exactly know what you mean. Um, Yeah, we wanted to talk about what needs to change in psychiatry these days. I checked if the medical field thinks that there needs to be some change. And funny enough, yes, they think changes need to happen, but they predominantly revolve around, that there are not enough doctors, that it takes too long for patients to get an appointment, and on it goes. So, and yeah, and of course, the psychiatrist should involve AI more in doing their work. So, but I don't think that is the real problem. What do you say?
Well, they're totally out of touch with who human beings actually are. We're spiritual entities walking around in these
Meat
spacesuits,
suits.
you know, meat suits. You know, they they have no concept of the spiritual entity that dwells within these bodies. You know,
Yeah.
they treat us like machines. Uh, they're making, I heard recently, $11 billion a year now selling antipsychotic drugs that actually do damage to the neurological system with long-term use.
Mhm.
You know, in the state hospital where I used to work, they had patients on these drugs for years, decades, and they could no longer walk with a normal gait. They called it the Thorazine shuffle. I've never seen a psychiatrist anywhere explain how dangerous these drugs could be with long-term use. They tell them, oh, your eyes will blur, your mouth will dry out, there will be sexual dysfunction, you're going to feel sleepy for a while. They don't tell them about the akinesia, the shaking, the tongue darting, the permanent neurological and peripheral nervous damage that these things do over extended periods of time. Matter of fact, they do the opposite. I've seen them do this scores of times where they'll tell the patient, well, your brain is broken. You got a chemical imbalance in your brain. Um, there's nothing you can do for it except take these toxic drugs. You
Mm.
know, so
But isn't that a problem in general that, yeah, probably not everybody, but a huge chunk of the medical field doesn't see doesn't have a holistic image of the human being. So, meaning they see it more like a car, this
yeah,
this kidney is no longer working, and okay, so here is somebody that is allegedly brain dead, so we rip out his, give it to that person, and everything is fine again.
that's where psychiatry runs into trouble because they got nothing they can rip out and replace. They've
Hmm.
got no pill that cures anything. Like the medical doctors, they can give you a pill for an infection and the infection goes away. Not so with psychiatry. Those pills that they give cure absolutely nothing. All they do is treat symptoms. And that's what they want because the symptoms come back and then you have to take the drugs again. None of those psychiatric drugs cure anything. All they do is tamp down symptoms.
Mm.
This all started back in 1910 with the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Group here in the US. They sponsored the infamous Flexner Report, which shut down any medical school teaching subjects outside of mainstream pharmacology. So here they are going, okay, we're going to make some money out of this. We can sell pills. Okay. The edict was so powerful that only a few medical schools survived, such as Johns Hopkins and McGill, and a handful of others connected with these groups. They were the only school who could legally license doctors. Any doctor who practiced anything other than pharmacology was outlawed and banned, and their license was threatened. So naturopathy, Tesla's violet rays, all that stuff was made illegal in the United States by the Rockefellers. Right?
Mm.
That's when they took over the medical system here in the U.S., and then it just followed suit elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to my kidney example, I mean, shouldn't be the approach how to keep the kidney healthy, that it doesn't even come to a complete failure. I mean, yes, there might be, let's say, some people that have a problem, let's say from birth, yeah, that just the kidneys are not just functioning very well, but I believe that for the majority of the people, it would be more helpful to learn about how to keep your organs healthy instead
Mm-hmm.
of, but of course, uh, organ transplant, that's also a money maker. But keeping it healthy isn't so beneficial
You
for
see,
the.
that doesn't work real well with psychiatry because they don't know what causes mental illness. They
Mhm.
think it's a chemical imbalance of the brain, which is, you know, that's been debunked long ago. Not I saw that when I first went to work at this giant psychiatric hospital. And I'd been brainwashed at that point for 6 years, psychology and counseling. Went in there, I thought that mental illness was caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain too. But then when I would go with my clients into the psychiatrist's office to bring them in there to get a diagnosis and put them on medications, never did they ever once do any kind of diagnostic test to determine what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. Ever. Never saw one. Finally, I asked one of the psychiatrists, I said, if it's a chemical imbalance of the brain, how do you know which one of the, I think there's about 200 of them, neurotransmitters in the brain are out of balance or by how much? And he said, oh, the drug companies handle that stuff. They tell us what to give. So there is not a single objective test to determine what chemicals are out of balance in the patient's brain or by how much. They don't exist. They never have. They don't even know what the chemical imbalance of the brain should be. So it's a friggin' lie. And it was started by Eli Lilly Drug Company in the late 1980s after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac. The idea that a chemical imbalance uh, hit the psychiatric mainstream at that time. Psychiatrist Peter Brigham in 1991 points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their drug Prozac. There was, of course, no demonstrable evidence showing that a depressed patient had any imbalance in the brain whatsoever, but Lilly ran with it anyway. Before long, psychiatrists and psychologists had picked it up, and they came to identify with the mental disorders being caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. It's a complete fabrication. It's a total lie. They've disproved it at this point, but they're still pushing it to sell their drugs. You know, so the 11 billion, not million, 11 billion in antipsychotic drugs every year, and something like I think last I checked, it was like 6 years ago, it was 7.4 billion in antidepressant drugs that don't cure anything, nothing. They just tamp down symptoms, and the person feels like a hollowed out shell. I mean, they can't think straight. They can't really function really well. It's better than being psychotic. Not to say that these drugs, especially the antipsychotics, aren't necessary in some cases. Believe me, after working on the front lines with some of these chemically or criminally insane prisoners, I mean, that's the only thing you could use to calm those guys down. And the ones drug into emergency rooms, the police would drag them in raw. They're totally psychotic. You can't deal with them in that kind of shape. So
Yeah.
basically, these antipsychotic drugs are taking the place of what do you call them? The where they tie the guys up, straitjackets.
Mhm.
So these antipsychotic drugs were actually discovered in Germany in a dye lab. The people in the dye lab were getting all gorked out, and you know some French scientists came in. I forgot Roach or something. I forgot who they were, but they came in and they extracted the active ingredient for antipsychotic drugs in France. Now, back then, they had the Freudians had taken over the mental health system, and they wouldn't let them administer these drugs to psychotics in Europe. So they came over to the United States, got one of the mental hospitals, state mental hospitals, to agree, and they knocked out the entire population. And they found that these drugged psychotic patients were much easier to deal with when they're walking around just like in an ozone. They weren't violent, they weren't attacking anybody. They were, still hearing the voices, but they were completely sedated. And at that time, there was a battle between neurology and psychiatry for who was going to dominate this field. And psychiatry was losing badly. So they latched on to these antipsychotic drugs like a lifesaver and just took control of them. So they had something that actually worked with these psychiatric populations. And then it just went from there. They found they could manage these psychiatric hospitals cheaper with less staff. Less people were getting hurt. Because I talked to some of the old timers in the big psych hospital I worked at. They used to have some horrendous wrestling matches with some of these psychotic patients, and they become supernaturally strong when they get upset. I saw that in the prison. I mean, they're like twice as strong as they are normally, and it's like almost it's unbelievable. When they get upset, they just get supernaturally strong. I've seen like a 150-pound psychotic prisoner bounce around two big guards inside of the cell like a popcorn. I mean, you have to have psychiatric drugs to deal with people like that.
Mm, yeah. But not everybody is violent.
No, not everybody is violent, but what they do is they will calm down the voices that these people hear. Okay, they will slow them down, but in most cases they don't get rid of them. And even if they get rid of them, once they go off of those drugs, they come back. So they're not curing anything. They're not getting at the cause. They're again tamping down the symptoms.
Yeah, because they are dealing with entities.
Yes, these see, psychiatry and psychology will not ask where thoughts come from. They won't even go there because there's no way to measure it. Nobody's ever found a thought in an autopsy.
Yeah.
Nobody found a thought in a person's brain, right? So they don't ask that question. Emanuel Swedenborg, 300 years ago, a Christian mystic in Sweden, he said that none of your thoughts are your own. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell or they come in from somewhere in between. So he's basically saying that your brain is like a radio receiver.
Hmm.
It's tuned to a certain frequency. So the people who were physically, sexually, and mentally abused as kids are turned to a very low frequency. So these entities are attracted to those low frequencies. Right? They're like sharks that swim in the ocean and smell blood. When they smell somebody of a low frequency, they move in on them. And they actually move in on preachers, and if they can bring down a preacher, that's like a bonus for them. They must get paid extra or something for bringing down a preacher. But they hit us all. When you're walking around and all of a sudden you have this intrusive thought come into your head, it just plows in there, and it's telling you to do something that you would never think of on your own, that you would never consciously do, but it's telling you to do that. That's not you. It doesn't even feel like you, and you know it's you, and it's startling. There's one example I gave that happened a few years ago with me here in Arizona. We don't have grass, so we go out and we chop the cactus with a machete to keep it from taking over everything.
Mm.
So I was out in the backyard chopping cactus with a machete, and my dog runs by. She's a beautiful, pure white uh, husky, and I have the machete in my hand, and when she runs by, this thought barges into my mind, and it goes, "Cut her head off." And here I'm standing with a machete, and I'm like, "That's not me," you know. But it
Yeah.
was upsetting anyway. It upset
It
me just
is.
having that thought. And that's what they were feeding off of.
Yeah, it is, and that is important because if people are very, very sensitive, they think something is wrong with them. But keep in mind, we all are spiritually under attack.
Yes,
Maybe not 24/7, but occasionally, yeah, everybody.
yeah,
And
and schizophrenics all the time,
yeah,
or most all the time.
yeah. And what you said, that the brain is more like a receiver, that is also the same approach in Buddhism, that we all move through a field of consciousness, and what we are picking up on is different for everybody, but that the brain is not the producer of thought. It's more like a, yeah, like you said, a radio station, a radio receiver. Yeah.
Yeah, so they want you to think that you can take a drug and that'll going to make you better, because that's what happens with medical stuff. You take a drug, you have a rash, you have a headache, you have an infection, you take a drug. That doesn't work the same with mental health. they don't have a drug that cures mental problems because those mental problems originate from thoughts. And these entities, what I found, so I studied these things probably close to 35, 40 years. I'm still working with people that are hearing voices. And these things are energetic entities. They're energy. They're not physical. So what they do is they put thoughts into your thought stream. And since nobody asks where thoughts come from, and it's assumed that if you have a thought in your head, it belongs to you because it's happening in your head. So you think, okay, I own it. That's not what happens. These things will insert, and I've talked to scores of schizophrenics, these things insert thoughts into their thought stream. They're negative thoughts. But what's so strange about it is that they sound, for the most part, just like the thousands or millions of other thoughts that goes through the patient's mind on a given day.
Hmm.
So there's no, we are the voices, yeah, and you're no good and you're rotten. It's not like that. It's like you're worthless. It's just a thought and you're worthless. And that's one of the biggest ones I find in working with Mace energy method too, and dealing with trauma. The biggest one is you're worthless. Something happened to them when they were a kid. Their mom did something, their dad did something, and it's really a shame that that could be gotten rid of in an hour. And these poor people have, they're like 65, 75 years old now, and they've been working with that idea that they're worthless for decades. It's affected their entire life. It's affected everything they've done and prevented them from doing things. And it can be gotten rid of in an hour with the Mesa energetic therapy because thoughts are energy. Negative identities are energy. We're energetic beings. Your spirit is energy. Your thoughts are energy. Your vision is energy. Everything about you is energy. If your body, if your energy leaves, if your spirit leaves, um, you're dead. Your energy is gone. That reminds me of a one day at Central State Hospital. This place was gigantic. It sprawled over thousands of acres. There were over 200 buildings there. And one day I was going to lunch, and I always passed the morgue going to lunch. It was on my way to lunch, and I always wondered what went on in there. So I'd walk by the windows and I'd look in there to see if I could see something. And it looked like Frankenstein's lab. There were all these bottles and tubes and all this strange equipment in there. And one day I was on my way to lunch, and the maintenance men at the psychiatric rehab center where I worked and the mortician were having a battle over the parking lot that belonged to the mortician. So there were extra parking spaces there, but the maintenance men would take all his slots. So when he brought in a body, he had no way to get it into the morgue, and they would not stop doing that. And he was getting more and more pissed off. So one day I'm on top of the hill over that parking lot. There's one slot opened, and the maintenance man and the mortician come in at the same time. And the maintenance man just barely cut off the mortician and took the slot. And the mortician was boiling. So both of them are in state vehicles. The mortician yells out the window, "Get out of my spot." And the maintenance man had already got out of his truck and started walking away. So the mortician started screaming. He ignored him. So the mortician floored the gas pedal and rammed his truck into the back of the maintenance man's truck. And here's this explosion of broken glass and plastic, both cars badly dented. He backs his mortician's truck up again and he yells at the maintenance man and he goes, "Now move your truck." And the maintenance man is stunned. He just stood there, but he was too macho to give in. So he just stood there looking at the guy. So the mortician floored it again and slammed into his truck a second time. Both vehicles are wrecked by now. The mortician backs up his truck, and the maintenance man gets in his truck and moves it out of the way. Mortician pulls in with his wrecked truck, and it was over. So I saw that, and then there was one day I was walking by the morgue, looking in the windows like I always did, and then all of a sudden the mortician pops out of the door, and he's standing there looking at me, and I was like mortified. And then I go, "Are you the mortician?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, you're my hero. I saw what you did on the. I was on top of the hill when you plowed into the maintenance man's truck. You know, and then it became a cordial conversation. I'm like, what are you doing there? I mean, because I'd never seen a dead body at that point. So he said, well, I'll tell you what. Tell me what your phone number is, and the next time I get a body, I'll call you over. So I get a call one day in my office. He goes, I got one. He said, okay, I'll be over in a few minutes. I go over there, and I actually got to see the inside of that, Frankenstein's lab, and that's what it looked like. So he takes me into the back room, and here's this skinny dead guy. He's a black guy. He looked like somebody who came out of one of the concentration camps. I mean, he was just skin and bone. And he gives me a pair of gloves, and I put them on. And he goes, lift this leg. So I lift this leg, and it was like a stick. I lift it, and it was abnormally heavy. It felt like it was lead. And I pick it up, and I look at him shocked. And he knew what I was thinking. I'm like, you know, and rigor mortis hadn't set in yet, so there wasn't any resistance that way. And he looks right in the eye and he goes, "That's what they mean by dead weight.
By dead what?
Dead weight.
Dead weight.
Didn't you ever hear the term dead weight?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that's over here. It's pretty prevalent. It's like something that's just really heavy. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they call it dead weight, but I didn't know where it came from until then. That leg was like 3 times heavier than it should have been.
Hmm.
So with the spirit gone, it's just dead weight. It's very heavy.
Hmm.
So we're spiritual beings. That spirit gone, and you know your body just turns to it rots away.
Yeah.
But psychiatry has no idea of that. They can't even conceive of that. In the whole, what was it, 8 years I spent studying psychology and counseling, not once did they ever mention spirituality at all.
Yeah, of course not. Because everything is just, yeah, on the meat and bones level.
Yeah, yeah. So when I ran into Mace, which is an energetic psychotherapy, you've experienced it at least
Hmm.
once. You know, it was like that takes the spirit into account. Right?
Hmm.
It's not blatant, but what happens is when you get into a trauma, that bad feeling just stays there and it just doesn't go away. But during a trauma, you also make a um, determination as to what part you played in that trauma. Right? Both
Hmm.
of those go together. After a while, that trauma, just that pain, just doesn't go away. It just stays there and torments you. And the ego eventually shows up and goes, all right, let me handle this. Takes it and throws it into your subconscious and locks it down. Right? It's not dead. It's still alive. So it affects you, first of all, when somebody who is similar to the person who traumatized you shows up, that thing goes off like a landmine because that person's way too close to this garbage you got buried in here. And, you know, it projects it out onto them and says, it's that guy. Right? So that's like the person you hate. They just keep coming up over and over and over again. You could go from here to China, and a guy like you that like that will come up, sooner or later. So that will keep happening as long as that negative identity is buried there. Okay. So it's very specific as to what triggers it. So this isn't a spiritual thing. This is a actual programming. It's like a program in a computer, only it's like a mind virus. Okay? So
Hmm.
every time somebody shows up who's similar to the person who traumatized you, that thing goes off. Every time it goes off, it gets stronger. And after it goes off enough times, you go, well, that's just the way I am. I just don't like these kind of people. Right. So when one comes along, so they keep coming along, that thing keeps going off. The more it goes off, the stronger it gets.
Hmm.
So you can get the Mace system goes in there and it finds that negative identity, it outlines it, turns it into an image, and at that point you can now drain it. So it does the same thing that like when you get a car battery, you can get a brand new car battery, charge it up full, and you leave it go till it's dead. You can't recharge it again. It's a boat anchor. So what Mace does, it goes in there and it drains that negative energy. Once it's gone, that that negative identity is gone with it. So there's no longer a reaction when people like that show up. Okay? It's gone. It's out of your psychic sphere. But where does it go? Okay? They don't tell you that part. But what happens is your attention, you can use your attention to form a psychological structure to your spirit, and negative energy moves from negative to positive, right? So that negative energy will be transferred to the spirit, and the spirit then transduces it. It changes it, doesn't get rid of it. It changes it to positive energy. And John Mace, who came up with this system, he wasn't a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so he didn't have to go through all breaking all the programming that I had to get to the truth. You know, he was a ship captain, and he had to be aware of all kinds of energy, you know, magnetic energy, tides, electricity, mechanical energy. So, you know, to run these big freighters, you had to be aware of all this energy. He found that negative energy moves toward positive energy. And that's the foundation of the Mace energy method that he found, is that transmutation of that negative energy to positive energy by the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And if the spirit didn't take that energy and change it, it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I also looked around what, regular people think about psychiatry and if they think what should change and how they feel about it. I wrote down a couple of comments, and some of them are pretty radical, but I would like to have your thoughts on that. So,
All right.
someone said, remove all legal powers and legal recognition of anything to do with psychiatry. Do you agree?
All legal powers.
Yeah,
But
in the sense that they can force you to take medication, in the sense that they can declare you unfit if you are not cooperating, yada yada yada. You know what I mean, yeah?
well, yeah, I know what you mean. I've seen them abuse it. You
Hmm.
know, I've seen them abuse it, and they abuse it in Britain worse than anywhere else, from what I'm hearing.
Hmm.
So here in the U.S., um, in the emergency room, if you're out of control, they can inject you with an antipsychotic. Okay, but they can only hold you for, I think it's a short time. It's like 7 or 14 days here in the U.S. before you get a court hearing. So if you're not compliant with your drugs and you get violent, they have a court hearing where they have a uh, like a judge come into the mental hospital, and then the psychiatrist shows up, and then somebody like me will show up who's working with the patient, and they will present the case against the patient. But the patient here can get a court appointed lawyer, okay, to help them. So in a lot of cases, the psychiatric patient doesn't want to be in the psychiatric hospital because it's filled with all these crazy people. You know,
Hmm.
they don't want to be there. They don't want to be confined. So they will try to get out however way they can. Um, so here's this court thing where they get together, and the psychiatrists and people like me present evidence for, you know, holding that patient if we feel he needs to be held. And the lawyer comes in and tries to get him out. Okay? And what I hated about that is you couldn't speak freely in there. You couldn't just tell the judge, "Hey, I've had these experiences with this guy, and this is what happened. And this is what I think." No, it's structured by the legal structure. You can only say, you know, yes or no questions. They friggin' confine you to what you could say. So I remember this one where the guy was very dangerous, and there was this Jewish lawyer who was hell bent on getting this guy out, and no matter what cost, you know, and he was just, you know, bam, 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 bam. And, you know, the judge was taking this in, and I felt like I was, you know, tied up. I couldn't speak. So finally, I just blurted out what I thought. The lawyer jumped up and screamed objection, but I'd already got the information out. Uh, so they warned me, don't do that again. So you couldn't get away with it a lot. But in that case, they held the guy because he was dangerous. So they
Mm.
get a court hearing, but a lot of those court-appointed lawyers, um, they really don't work hard to try to get the patient out of there. And at the state hospital, what I saw was on the psych wards. Okay, so you didn't have the best psychiatrist there at all. So they would give these shock treatments. And I don't know, did I ever tell you what those things were like?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
they were horrific. They were just absolutely horrific.
yeah.
And
To me, that is torture.
well,
Has
yeah,
nothing to do with the treatment.
and it didn't cure, it really didn't cure
Yeah.
anything. So what I saw was psychotics who got that treatment would, and sometimes the voices would go away for a few days or a week or two, but they'd eventually come back.
Mm.
And who was controlling those shock treatments weren't the doctors. They weren't the nurses. They were the attendant staff on that unit who would go to the psychiatrist and say, "This guy's been giving us a hard time. I think he needs a shock treatment."
Mm.
So they would do it as they, under the guise of treatment. They virtually electrocute this guy. I watched one lady die on the bed on the shock treatment bed, and they had to resuscitate her. It's a horrific. I almost fainted. I mean, I almost fainted when the first one I saw, and they were given 3,000 of those every year at Central State Hospital while I was there. 3,000, and neurologists could see the damage, the neurological damage being done with each one. They weren't curing anything.
Yeah. And that is exactly why I think, personally, that the legal powers should be cut. We had a very, here in Germany, a case, when COVID broke out, and we had a female lawyer here, and she, from the get-go, said, mm-mm, mm-mm. So, and she was very vocal about it. She wrote about it.
Ended up
And
in a psych hospital.
yes,
Yep, I've seen
yes,
it.
yes. So, and that is exactly, I mean, she was out a couple of weeks later. She wasn't there. But the fact that they can do that to
Hmm.
somebody just because they descend with a narrative that, as we all know now, has been false from day one.
Yeah.
And that is why I found it very interesting when this person said, remove all legal powers to a certain degree. And I agree. They should not have that range of power over
No,
people.
no, they ought to have some kind of objective uh, process to appeal. And in Britain, they do, from what I hear in Britain, they do that all the time. They don't like you, they'll lock you into a psych ward. And last time we talked, I think we had Patrick Dirk with us, right?
That's
Describing what
right,
actually
exactly.
happened in there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you look at psychiatry, and you look at the suicide rates of schizophrenics are 3 to 5 times higher than that of the normal population. You look at psychiatry as a whole, their suicide rate is right up there with them. And these are the high priests of psychology and psychiatry. Their suicide rate is right up there with the most debilitated, the most psychotic of their patients.
Mm,
What does that tell you?
yeah. So here's another comment that I found interesting. Make Adderall and other stimulants completely illegal for anyone under 21 and reduce prescription for adults by 99%.
I think that would probably be a good idea because Adderall and Ritalin are actually meth.
Mm.
They're amphetamines. And I've talked to a number of prisoners in the prison who started off with Ritalin and Adderall and then just kept moving up the scale until they were out on the street and buying amphetamine. Now, the prisoners called amphetamine the devil's drug, you know, because these people who are using it, they start seeing what we call the shadow people. Okay, these are three-dimensional shadows that, for the most part, have no eyes. You know, they're mostly human forms, but not always. And that reminds me of a story. It was Christmas Eve, and I was stuck in the ER doing psych crisis. And in comes this one guy. Seemed like he was kind of a, you know, mousy kind of guy. He wasn't nasty, but he was shaking like a leaf. He was just trembling. He was like this the whole time. So when I got ready, I brought him in for a psychiatric evaluation, and I asked him, you know, what's going on with the shaking? He said, meth. I said, how long you been using it? He said, 10 years. I said, how are
Oh,
you taking it? He said, I inject it. And right away, that blew me away. I mean, he should have been dead 5 years ago or more. I mean, he's still alive. So my curiosity antennas went up like, what's going on with this guy? How come he's still alive? And I started talking to him and I asked him, have you ever seen the shadow people? And he goes, yeah, the whole time. I said, what do they look like? You know, three-dimensional shadows. I said, have you ever seen their eyes? So the ones who are worst off with the meth, they see the eyes of these things, and the eyes are either lime green or red. So if they see the eyes, they're orders of magnitude worse off than the ones that don't see the eyes. This is a secret clinical thing that I've developed. I mean, it's not in any of the books or anything, but if they see the eyes of these shadow people, they're much worse off than if they don't. So I'm asking him questions about the shadow people, and I asked him, I said, just out of curiosity, I said, have you ever heard them speak? Because I've never talked to anybody who heard them speak. He said, oh, yeah, I've heard them speak. And I said, oh, you have? I said, what do they sound like? And he's described this shrieky. It was almost like rubbing your fingers across a blackboard. This high pitched shrieky voice that it just gave me shivers just listening to his, uh, you know, mimic of the thing. So I said, you know, what did they tell you, or something like that? And soon as I asked that question, he stopped shaking. He went stark still. He was shaking the whole time he was in the emergency room. He went stark still, and his eyes turned jet black. They were like wells of darkness. I mean, just and out of those eyes came this cold this hatred, a hatred like I'd never felt before in my entire life. It was just like this cold hatred just emanating from whatever was looking out of his eyes. It wasn't his eyes anymore. It was something else, you know, and it's staring at me. And you know, I learned long ago that you can't back down from something like that. So I'm staring back at it, and the thought I got in my mind is this thing would rather rip your guts out and throw your intestines all over the room than say another word to you. And then, boom, just like that, the dark eyes disappeared and his eyes came back again. You know, so it was him again, and he started shaking again. And I'm like, well, he never did tell me what they told him. You know, so I'm like, okay, tell me what they told you. He said they told me to go out to the highway and jump in front of a truck. And he said, and I said, well, what'd you do? He said, well, I did. And he
this was the public hour. For full access of the entire interview, please join our Patreon community. Thank you.